Hey folks, it's Ray at Rainmaker.com, and today I've got a complete comparison between the Garmin Fenix 7 series and the Garmin Instinct 2 series. Now, I'm going to dive into all the nuanced features that aren't so obvious if you just look at the high-level specs, things that you only find out when you're actually using them out in the wild on like really long hikes and stuff like that. But before I do that, one little quick tip is almost everything in this video is also applicable to the Fenix 6, meaning when I say the Fenix 7, you can almost always substitute it with the Fenix 6, except for two exceptions I'll talk about later on. And the main reason I note that is because I noticed this morning the Fenix 6 is at $399 right now. Like as of today, it might be a little more tomorrow, but that's essentially the same price range as the Instinct 2 series. I'll put a link to that exact deal down below there, but you can kind of find it on and off for that same price over the last while. So speaking of that, the very first difference is the price itself and the size, of course. So on the left-hand side here, I have the Instinct 2S, which is a smaller edition, and then here I have the Instinct 2, and then here is the Fenix 7S, the smallest edition, the Fenix 7, and the Fenix 7X. And I'll put the starting prices on the screens right now there, but essentially the Instinct base is $349 versus the Fenix 7 Solar base is $699. And if you want Solar, it's $100 more for both of those. So it's $449 for the Solar edition and $799 for the Solar Fenix 7. And then if you want the Sapphire, which has other stuff we'll talk about later on, it costs even more than that. Waterproofing spec-wise, they're all the same at 100 meters. I've swam with all these watches. Okay, so from this point forward, I'm just going to focus on kind of comparing these two units, so there's no differences beyond that. Otherwise, you just have too many watches on the table. So the most obvious difference, of course, from the display standpoint is the fact that the Fenix 7 is a color display versus the monochrome display on the Instinct 2 series. And you'll see that not only in things like watch faces, this is a Connect IQ watch face, in fact, but also in the widget glances. So if I go down there, you'll see, those have more color in them and whatnot, but the data is still the same. There's no difference there. So if I look at this FTP one right there, I go down and find that same one. There we go, right there. Again, it's the same information, just simply displayed differently. Okay, and a quick note, if you're finding this helpful or useful or something like that, if you can do me a huge favor, just whack that like button at the bottom there. It really does help out this video and the channel quite a bit. The other big difference from a display standpoint is the fact that the Fenix 7 is touchscreen. So you can see this, I can swipe up and down like this versus this, you can touch it, but it won't do anything. It's not touchscreen. On the Fenix 7 series, though, you can disable touchscreen wherever you want. So you can say, I don't want it in day-to-day mode. I don't want it in sports. I don't want it just in a certain sport profile. I don't want it at all. You can do whatever you want there. They have the same buttons on both of them in that sense. So you can see there's two buttons on this side and then three buttons on the left-hand side, and they act the same way in terms of moving around them. It's all identical. From a screen resolution standpoint, the Instinct 2 is a 156 by 156 pixels versus the 260 by 260 for the Fenix 7. It's a little higher for the Fenix 7X, a little lower for the Fenix 7S. Okay, so for the next item, we're going to talk about mapping and navigation. And I can probably sit down and do an entire hour-long video just on mapping and navigation differences. So keep that in mind in the context of this. But the main difference, though, is the fact that the Fenix 7 has mapping or maps. And you download maps to the watch or the pre-installed, depending on which version you buy, but they're all free nonetheless, and they're all the same map. And this allows you to go ahead and see where you are, along with topo data for terrain and stuff like that, as well as points of interest. So you can see things like cafes and monuments and all the trails, and there's heat map data in that. All that's there. Versus the Instinct does not have any maps at all. So when you're out navigating, you get just simply a breadcrumb trail, which is fine. That's the way watches have been for like a decade and a half or something like that. And you can see these side by side here out on the trail where I have just the breadcrumb trail on the left-hand side with the Instinct series versus the Fenix 7 has the full map and shows me the trails around me. And it's easier to see what's going on around you, especially if you get off course. Because if you get off course with the Instinct, it just simply tells you how to get back to the course with a little arrow. Versus the Fenix 7 will actually reroute you back to the course based on the streets, the routes, the trails that are nearby. And then with that, of course, it can also redo all the elevation data and the Climb Pro data. And that gets to the next piece, which is that the Fenix 7 has Climb Pro, as does the Fenix 6, and I think even the Fenix 5. And Climb Pro basically will go ahead and take your planned route and it'll split up and show you each climb along the way. And it'll show you how high to the top in terms of elevation, the gradient left, the distance left. It's arguably my favorite Garmin feature out of every single thing on every single device they have. It's probably Climb Pro. And unfortunately, the Instinct series does not have that. It does instead, though, have an overall elevation graph. So you can see the elevation graph of your planned route, which is pretty helpful. And you can see your progress along that particular route. So for example, later on in this hike, you'll see how a portion of it is now shaded versus earlier on it was not. And of course, with all those mapping bits behind the scenes, if you do go off course on the Fenix 7, not only will it reroute you like I mentioned before, but it'll also update the Climb Pro climbs as well as your elevation profile till you get back on the course. Versus the Instinct is just like, I don't know what you did wrong, but I don't have an elevation profile for that, so I'm just going to stay on this until you figure out how to get back to where I am. And then the other difference with the mapping is that it uses that for elevation correction. So a good example of this was actually a hike I did a few days ago where I had basically started off in the mountains a ways and then went all the way down to the ocean. And when I got to the ocean, the Fenix 7 showed me at 0 meters. I was literally standing right on the water's edge there. The water just like almost hit my shoes. And so in that case, it showed the correct elevation. Versus the Instinct had drifted slightly because the weather had changed pretty dramatically over the course of that time period. Now, in the case of Fenix 7, the weather obviously changed for it as well. It'll actually allow you to lock your elevation to the known good elevation data from the map sets. So in that case, when I got to the ocean, it's like, yo, I know where the ocean is. Here are 0 meters. We're making sure the altimeter is calibrated to that. And of course, you can always manually override altimeter values for all these things on both watches. But in the Fenix 7, it's going to go ahead and probably keep more accurate altitude because of that base map there. Both units allow you to route to coordinates, so you can put coordinates in both units, except in the Instinct's case, because it doesn't have maps or anything else, it's just going to be like, your direction is that away, good luck. Versus the Fenix 7 can actually give you a true route on a trail or on a road or whatever the case may be to that location. One thing that is unique on the Fenix 7 and is not on the Fenix 6 is the new up ahead feature on the Fenix 7. So that'll show you the waypoints that are coming up that you've defined in your course file. Put little icons with it. It's just kind of like a simple dashboard of those up ahead waypoints. Next, we got battery life. And this is an area where the Instinct kind of wins because it's the only product in Garmin's category that features unlimited or forever power. Meaning the concept being that if you are out in a sunny day with a solar edition, you could potentially get enough solar power to last that watch forever in certain modes. Versus the solar edition on the Fenix 7, there is like a chance you can get forever power in certain modes, but Garmin doesn't advertise that, but it is there. Here's the two different battery charts back to back. The first one here is the Instinct. No in particular on the solar edition, the ones that say unlimited, that's where you could get there. And then here is the Fenix 7 battery chart. The main thing to note with the unlimited power is that that's based on Garmin's assumption of 3 hours per day at 50,000 lux conditions, which actually isn't super sunny. It's reasonably sunny out right now in the winter here in Amsterdam, and I'm betting this is probably pretty close to 50,000 lux conditions. Okay, I was curious. I just went out and measured 36,000 lux with lightly overcast skies out there. So you can see in the middle of winter, right? Mid-February. So you can see there's plenty of power to be had, especially if it was actually legit sunny as opposed to like half sunny. Versus in the summertime, I'm clearing 100,000 lux conditions. So in that case, if you were outdoors at the beach or something like that, you can easily surpass Garmin's solar battery expectations on both the Instinct as well as the Fenix 7 series. Okay, so next up we have the sport profiles. And this is where the Instinct 2 got the biggest boost in terms of functionality. It is nearly identical to the Fenix 7 series and the Fenix 6 as well. In this case, the sport profiles are almost identical as well. Now, here is just a gigantic dump boom of all the sport profiles on both watches. But what you need to know is the ones in the middle there. Those are the differences. Now, that said, there are some differences within the sport. So, for example, here is the strength training workouts. And so on the Fenix 7 series, you get these little animated different portions. So you can see for each step in the workout what you're supposed to be doing. This is more useful not necessarily for machine sports, but for things like core workouts where there's a lot of very specific movements. That isn't on the Instinct series, but is here on the Fenix 7 as well as the Fenix 6 series. Another big upgrade the Instinct got is that it has all new training status, including training load and purpose and training effect and VO2 max. All that stuff is there. It's identical on both the Fenix 7 as well as the Instinct and also the Fenix 6. But in the case of Instinct, you can't show any of the training load status stuff on the watch face for no particular good reason. So you can see all the stuff here. There's the data right there. But then on the Fenix 7, this is the 7X, but it doesn't really matter. You can see I have unproductive there because it loves me apparently. And thus that is the training status directly from the watch face. Okay, so the next category here is around the sensor support. And this is kind of divided into two camps. There's the straight up what sensors does it support, and then there's what the data is recorded behind the scenes and how it's displayed. So right there is a two list of sensor supports. Sensor supported sensors, you get the point. The main differences though are primarily cycling sensors. The Instinct has power meters now, it has smart trainers, but it does not have Varia radar, for example. It does not have the lights, it does not have shifting support. So it does not have DI2 or ETAP or Campagnolo shifting support. Now from the data standpoint, the Instinct gains cycling dynamics as well as running dynamics. Both watches do support Pace Pro plans now, which is pretty cool. So the Instinct series does support that. That's basically for pacing primarily a race, especially race with alternating terrain, where you want to like certain splits varied based on the terrain, going up and down, stuff like that. Super cool stuff. It's great to see that supported on the Instinct. The Instinct, however, does not support Strava Live segments on the device itself. yourself. You'll still get credit for segments after the fact on Strava, of course, from any device, but in terms of live segments, it's not on the Instinct, but is on the Fenix 7 series. The next thing that the Instinct doesn't have is the new Garmin Stamina feature. This came on the Fenix 7, so it's not on the Fenix 6 or anything else except the Fenix 7 and Epix at this point. And that's something that's essentially like body battery for workouts. And so this 100% will decrease down to 0%. And in theory, when you get to 0%, you can't do anything more. Like you're basically just lying on the side of the road and crying softly to yourself. And it shows it both in distance till that point as well as time to that point, so duration. And I find it actually reasonably accurate for the most part, especially in more intense activities. Next up, we got the GPS and altimeter kind of category. And there's some pretty big differences here. The first one is that depending on which model of Fenix 7 you have, you could have multi-band or dual frequency GPS access. So that's offered on the Sapphire editions, which basically cost $200 more than the base Fenix 7 edition. So we're talking way more than the Instinct would be at this point. Whereas the Instinct series is using the older Sony chipset that just has GLONASS and Galileo. But in my testing though, they're really darn similar. Like out in this hike the other day, they are almost identical even in like the worst of scenarios, like dense jungles, steep switchbacks around mountains, and very, very similar. There are, of course, a handful of scenarios where multi-band GPS, again on the Sapphire editions of the Fenix 7, is producing better tracks. So here you can see this building. This is like a really great simple example of this, just around kind of my neighborhood. This is like a 15 or so story building, maybe 10, I don't know, somewhere in that range there. And you can see how the Fenix 7, or Epix in this case, which is basically just the prettier Fenix 7, really nails the turns around this building versus the Instinct kind of meanders a little bit. It's not quite as perfect. But again, we're talking really minor differences in the grand scheme of most GPS tracks. From an altimeter accuracy standpoint, the Instinct series did get some upgrades, both in terms of placement of the altimeter hole, as well as some software bits underneath, and the internal components are all different on the Instinct 2. In comparing these side by side, they're virtually identical. The one difference, though, as I mentioned earlier on, was the altimeter locking to the map set on the Fenix 7, which is something that's not offered on the Instinct. Next up, there's music, Wi-Fi, and Garmin Pay, and the answer is yes to all those on all versions of the Fenix 7, versus the Instinct series only has music controls of your phone. So it'll control what you're playing on your phone, but won't actually store music on it itself. The Fenix 7, you can download music, both MP3 files, as well as link to Spotify and Deezer and Amazon Music, and download that to the device, and then go out where there's no cell phone coverage or anything like that, and play that music back to headphones. That's again something using that storage that's on the Fenix 7, as well as the Bluetooth headphone connectivity. And then all editions of the Fenix 7 have Wi-Fi versus none of the Instinct do, but realistically that doesn't really matter if you're not downloading maps or music to the Instinct. That's really the only thing you need Wi-Fi for. And then for Garmin Pay, which is contactless payments, the Instinct does have that on the Solar editions only. So as long as you have a Solar edition of the Instinct 2 series, then you will get Garmin contactless payments, versus all of the Fenix 7 series does have Garmin Pay. Next, we've got the optical heart rate sensor, and this is identical across them. So if you look on the back, this is the Garmin Generation 4 optical heart rate sensor. This is the latest optical heart rate sensor that was added starting last spring or so to Garmin watches with the Venue 2 series, and it supports all the same features across the board. So that includes pulse ox for blood oxygenation levels, includes 24/7 heart rate tracking and stress tracking and breathing rate. All that stuff is there, as well as, of course, workout modes. And it also supports broadcasting that heart rate. So you can broadcast it on both ANT Plus as well as Bluetooth Smart on both of these units. In terms of accuracy, real world accuracy between the two of them, basically been identical from what I've seen, which makes sense. It's the same sensor. In general, though, keep in mind, if you're looking at something like the heavier, bigger Fenix 7X, you might not see as good a performance because, as a rule of thumb across all watches by all companies, the bigger a watch is, the more it might bounce around your wrist. And then with that bouncing, you get less accuracy of optical heart rate. So just kind of keep that in mind. It'll vary from person to person. If you have a bigger wrist, it's less of an issue. If you have a really small wrist and try to put on a big watch, it's harder to get that nice and snug on there where you don't get any light leakage under that. Next, from a safety standpoint, they're essentially the same. They provide instant detection on both of them. So if you crash your bike or something like that, it'll notify your friends and family. It'll send them a live tracking link to where you are, and then it'll follow you in the ambulance to the hospital. It's kind of cool stuff. It's the same on virtually all of Garmin watches. They keep this kind of as the baseline there. And then both of them also have the assistance feature. So if you're feeling unsafe somewhere, you can just simply hold down this upper left-hand button, just keep on holding it a little bit longer, and it'll go ahead and trigger notification to your friends and family silently. You can see that right there. And then both watches will do live track. So when you don't crash your bike, and you just simply want to go ahead and live track your workout, any workout of any type that's outdoors, you can go ahead and send a link to your friends and family, tells them where you are, even shows them your planned course, for example. That's all there. But in the case of the Fenix 7, it also does group track. So if you have your friends listed in Garmin Connect, it'll show your friends out and about during the workouts while you're doing the workout. And note that both units support Garmin's inReach range. So that's their satellite communicators. So if you're outside of cell phone coverage, out in the middle of the ocean, wherever it may be, you can go ahead and use inReach to message friends and family from the watch or from the app. But but at least it's connected to the watch so you can get those notifications on the device itself. Okay, next up is the Garmin Connect IQ support. Now, Instinct 2 added Connect IQ support, which is a huge thing. It added support for watch faces. This is in fact a Connect IQ watch face right here. Both these are, of course. And then 2, it added support for data fields and apps and widget glances. All that stuff is there now on Connect IQ. But you're likely to see some differences between what apps are available. Now, at launch, you usually see like a few weeks or even a month or two delay between when apps confirm they are compatible with a given device. So there's a factor of that. But also there may be apps that just simply take advantage of coloring that don't work on a black and white display. In fact, one example of that is Garmin's own Connect IQ app store app, however you want to describe that, their own Connect IQ app. You cannot do a face-it watch face. So face-it watch faces are basically you take your own picture and you stick it on the watch. You can't do that for the Instinct, but you can do that for the Fenix 7, the Fenix 6, the Fenix 5, Fenix. You can do it for every single other watch in Garmin's lineup except the Instinct. Point being, there probably will see more differences with Connect IQ apps over time. It won't matter for things like data fields, for example, because that's just generally black and white text, but it may matter for more complex apps that are using color in a lot of unique ways. The other very minor difference is that the Fenix 7, along with the Epic series, were the first watches to add the Connect IQ store on the watch itself. This allows you to go and see like their top 5 to 7 apps, but you can't browse beyond that. So it's hyper limited right now. Down the road, I'm sure it'll change over the next year or two. Again, this is only like a month old. Okay, so where do we stand? Well, you know, pricing and like value and stuff is all a very personal decision. The thing I would keep in mind is depends on what you're using it for. If you're doing like lots of long trekking and stuff like that in the backcountry, I think the maps are incredibly valuable as a bit of a backstop against going off the wrong direction and being able to have context to where you are. That's something you will not see on the Instinct series. At the same time, if you're not using that and want all the other features, the Instinct is great for that battery life, especially if you're spending a lot of times outdoors in the summer. You're very likely to hit unlimited power and just stay there and never have to charge, and that's pretty cool. And all the sport features are there for the most part, so you're not going to be losing out on a lot of that stuff. Still, I go back to looking at the price this morning of the Fenix 6 and being like, yeah, this is sort of the way to go right now. $399, again, that price will vary a little bit, but I suspect we'll see it frequently in that $399 to mid $400 price point for virtually all the same features as the Fenix 7, minus the stamina, minus a multi-band GPS, and minus the up-ahead waypoints. Like those are the main 3 things. And of course, then the Fenix 6 has way more capabilities and features than the Instinct 2 does for effectively the same price. Now, whether or not you get solar and stuff like that, that price point's a whole different ballgame. But the point being that I would consider that if you're trying to decide between these two, but don't necessarily want to spend that much for the Fenix 7. Now, there you go. Hopefully you found this interesting or useful. If so, consider whacking that like button at the bottom there. It really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. And I got plenty more comparisons and plenty more products coming up that you'll definitely want to stay tuned for. So with that, have a good one.